Hi guys, welcome to Blush and Blood, the show where we prove that the most dangerous monsters don't hide in dark alleys. They hide in plain sight. In business suits. In volunteer vests. And sometimes, behind a painted smile. Today, we are talking about a man who took that final deception to its absolute extreme, a man who literally used clown makeup to lure children and young men to their untimely deaths. We are dissecting the life of a master manipulator who lived a double life so stark it defies belief, a man who entertained sick kids at children's hospitals by day, bringing laughter to pediatric wards, and by night, crawled into the darkness to bury young men under his own floorboards. A man named John Wayne Gacy. But here's the twist you won't hear on the standard news broadcasts or read in a summarized true crime article. Gacy wasn't caught because of an incredible breakthrough in forensic DNA technology, which was virtually non-existent at the time anyway. He wasn't caught because of a sudden attack of conscience that led to a voluntary confession. He was caught because a teenage boy went missing on a cold December evening, and one desperate, fiercely determined mother refused to stop screaming until she got answers. So grab your foundation brush, choose your favorite palette, and steady your nerve. Because we're about to apply a full face of horror, blending beauty with absolute tragedy. This is the comprehensive story of the killer clown. Before we talk about the bodies, and trust me, there were a lot of bodies packed into a horribly confined space, we have to talk about the mask. And I don't mean the literal clown paint that he applied with a sponge before community parades. I mean the psychological mask of normalcy. The dangerous camouflage of, he seemed like such a nice man, which allowed him to operate undetected for years. Let me put on my own mask first as we begin this journey. Primer goes on like the first layer of denial. As I rub this silicone barrier into my skin, it smooths over every deep pore, every tiny flaw, every imperfection. It creates an artificial surface that says to the world, I am put together. I am safe. I am completely unproblematic. John Wayne Gacy was a master of primer. His social surface was flawlessly smooth. On the outside, to the residents of suburban Cook County, Illinois, he was a Democrat precinct captain who could mobilize voters at a moment's notice. He was a man of status, someone who shook hands with First Lady Rosalynn Carter and had the photograph framed proudly on his wall. He was a father to his children, a husband to his wife, and a hard-working small business owner who ran PDM contractors with an iron fist. He threw legendary summer block parties, setting up volleyball nets and blasting music. He stood at the grill, cooking burgers for the neighbors, laughing, joking, and pouring drinks. One neighbor, a woman named Joan, later recalled her interactions with him to the police, saying, he was the first one to help if your car broke down on a freezing morning. He'd shovel your driveway without being asked, before you even woke up. That is the mask. That is the social primer. Smooth. Friendly. Completely disarming. But under that primer, under that perfect, poreless surface that he presented to the political elite and his suburban neighbors, there was an emotional cavity. A deep, rotting void. And inside that void lay a childhood you wouldn't wish on a stray dog, a foundational history built on violence, degradation, and psychological warfare. We're going to do our concealer now, patting it under the eyes and over the blemishes. Because the thing about Gacy is, he spent his entire adult life trying to conceal what his father did to him, masking the deep bruises of his childhood with a veneer of hypermasculinity and civic achievement. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born in Chicago in 1942, entering a world that was unforgiving from the start. His father, John Wayne Gacy Sr., was a deeply troubled, alcoholic auto repairman. He was a textbook bully, a man who ruled his household with terror and fists. He was a father who called his young son stupid, queer, and a disappointment so many times, day after day, that the young boy eventually stopped flinching at the insults. When young John tried to please his father, when he worked himself to exhaustion and brought home straight A's from school, his father wouldn't offer a word of pride. Instead, he would slap him across the face and say, "You're just showing off. You think you're better than me." Imagine growing up in a house where praise was a trap. Where every single achievement was met with a clenched fist or a degrading remark. At age 11, while playing outside, John was hit severely in the head by a heavy swing. A blood clot formed in his brain, undiagnosed for years, causing him to suffer from intense, terrifying blackouts throughout his youth. His father's response to his medical condition: "Walk it off, you sissy. Stop faking it for attention." That's the root of the pathology. It is absolutely not an excuse. It is not a moral justification for the horrors that followed. But it is the root. When you are taught from infancy that vulnerability gets you hit, you learn to wear a mask to survive. And when you learn to wear a mask long enough, when you lock your true self away in a dark room for decades, you eventually forget there's a real human face underneath. Let's set this base look before we move on. Powder. Because Gacy's psychological mask was fully set, baked, and hardened by the time he was 18 years old. He desperately wanted to escape his father's shadow, so he left home, determined to prove he could succeed. He got a job as an energetic shoe salesman, learning how to read people, how to flatter them, how to sell them an illusion. He married his first wife, Marlene, a woman who believed she had found an ambitious, stable provider. They moved to Waterloo, Iowa, where Gacy's frantic work ethic earned him a position as a manager at a local Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. He was doing everything right according to the American dream. But beneath the floorboards of his mind, the darkness was pacing. And that's where his first body almost surfaced. Okay, let's take a transition shade on a fluffy brush. You know the drill by now. A little bit of warmth right in the crease of the eyelid. We're building depth, adding layers, because every mask, no matter how thick, no matter how carefully set, eventually develops cracks. In 1967, in the quiet community of Waterloo, Iowa, John Gacy was considered a spectacular, rising star. He was elected the local JC's president, a massive civic honor. He was named the city's Young Man of the Year. He had a dedicated wife, 2 beautiful young kids, and a completely spotless reputation among the local business owners. But at night, when the sun dipped below the Iowa cornfields, a completely different dynamic emerged. He began hosting late-night parties for teenage boys in his basement, transforming his home into a playground for local youths. He'd serve them free beer, a luxury for underage kids. He'd play pool with them, acting like the cool, older mentor they could trust. And then, as the night wound down and the other kids left, he'd ask specific boys to stay late to help him clean up or talk business. The illusion shattered when 2 different teenage boys went to the authorities and accused him of horrific sexual assault. One of them told a terrifying story. Gacy had tricked him into coming over to the house under the pretense of a job interview for a high-paying position, and once the boy was isolated, Gacy bound him and attacked him. Gacy's legal team tried to smooth it over, but the evidence was clear. He pleaded guilty to sodomy. He was sentenced to 10 years at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. But here's where the mask flexed its monstrous muscles, demonstrating its terrifying utility. In prison, Gacy didn't act like a dangerous predator, he acted like a saint. He was such a model prisoner, so charming to the guards, so helpful in the prison kitchen, so politically savvy within the institution, that the parole board deemed him completely rehabilitated. He was paroled after serving just 18 months of a 10-year sentence. 18 months. For destroying the innocence of 2 boys. The system patted him on the back and sent him on his way. Now I'm going to take a deep maroon shade and pack it into the outer corner of the eye. We are deepening the look, adding shadow, because Gacy's internal darkness was deepening exponentially after his release from prison. The stay in Anamosa hadn't cured him, it had educated him on how to be a better criminal. He moved back to the Chicago area, the terrain of his childhood trauma. He lived with his mother for a time, re-establishing his roots. He quickly found another woman to bring into his illusion, marrying again, a woman named Carol Hoff, a divorcee who had 2 young daughters of her own. Seeking financial independence, he started his own residential construction company, naming it PTM Contractors. He hired young, strong, high school-aged boys to do the heavy lifting, establishing a constant stream of young male labor flowing through his business. And then, like a moth to a flame, he dove right back into civic life. He joined the local JC's chapter again, hiding behind the ledger books. He joined a local Democratic political organization, making friends with judges and police commissioners. And then, he became a clown. A clown is an entity that exists solely to project joy. When a person puts on that makeup, they erase their history, their sins, and their identity. He didn't want to be a sad clown. He didn't want to be a traditional circus clown performing under a big top. He wanted to be a political clown, a volunteer clown who operated in the community. He created a persona, calling himself Pogo the Clown. He sat in front of his mirror and painstakingly painted his face, a thick, blinding white base, oversized red lips, and sharp, pointed blue triangles around his eyes. He performed at children's hospitals, walking through wards of terminally ill kids. He twisted balloons at charity events. He waved from flatbed trucks at community parades. Parents absolutely loved him. They saw a selfless businessman giving up his weekends for charity. Kids loved him because he was funny, vibrant, and warm. He would hand out coloring books with his business name stamped on them. He would do intricate magic tricks, making coins disappear into thin air. And then, when the parade was over and the makeup was washed away, he would drive home. He would park his car outside his modest ranch house located at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township. And he would wait in the quiet house for his prey. Let's go truly dark now with the eyes. We're working on the outer V. Because we're about to metaphorically enter the crawl space, descending into the absolute depths of human depravity. Take your eyeliner. Liquid black. Winged. Make it sharp enough to kill. Don't blink, because if you look away for even a second, you miss the sheer velocity of his crimes. Between the years of 1972 and 1978, within a 6-year window of absolute terror, John Wayne Gacy systematically murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Most of his targets were teenagers, young boys just starting their lives. They were runaways who had fled broken homes, gay hustlers trying to survive on the streets of Chicago, boys who were already living on the harsh margins of society. They were the kind of kids that a biased, 1970s society labeled as troubled, the kind of kids whose disappearances weren't taken seriously, whose families were told by police that they would come home when they ran out of money. His hunting method was chillingly calculated and repetitive. He'd drive his large, black Oldsmobile through the neon-lit streets, targeting the Greyhound bus station downtown or cruising near gay bars where vulnerable youth congregated. He'd pull up to the curb, lower his window, and flash a fake police badge he bought at a novelty shop. He'd adopt an authoritative yet friendly tone. Hey kid, you want some beer? You want a warm meal? You looking to make some quick money on a construction site? To a kid who hadn't eaten in 2 days, he looked like a savior. He'd bring them back to the Summerdale Avenue house. Once inside the safety of his living room, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, he'd pour them a drink. He'd chat them up, building rapport, and then he'd show them his famous magic tricks. He'd pull out a pair of high-quality handcuffs. Look at these, he'd say with a grin. These are special police cuffs. I'll put these on you, and with a secret twist of the wrist, you can slip right out of them. Want to try? The unsuspecting teenager, wanting to participate in the game, would offer his wrists. Gacy would snap the cuffs shut with a heavy metallic click. Except the handcuffs weren't a trick. They were completely real. And the only key was safely tucked inside Gacy's pocket. The moment the cuffs clicked, the friendly contractor vanished, and the monster emerged. He'd subject them to hours of unthinkable physical torture and sexual assault. And finally, when he was done playing with his victims, he'd kill them. Sometimes he used a thick rope or a makeshift wooden tourniquet, slowly twisting it around their necks until their airways collapsed. Sometimes, to vary his cruelty, he would brutally shove a cloth or an item of underwear deep down their throats with a stick until they suffocated in total darkness. And then, while their bodies were still warm, he'd drag them down the hallway, open a small, hidden hatch in his utility closet, and push their remains into the crawl space. The crawl space. A dark, unlit, dirt-floored void running underneath the entirety of his ranch house. 26 human beings were crammed into that damp dirt. They were stacked directly on top of each other in shallow trenches Gacy dug himself, suffocated by the heavy clay. Some were stuffed hastily into black plastic trash bags, some were buried naked, Some still had the fabric tourniquets tied tightly around their skeletal necks. As the bodies began to accumulate and the natural process of decay took over, a horrific, heavy stench began to permeate the floorboards of the home. To combat this, Gacy bought hundreds of pounds of agricultural lime, crawling through the dirt on his hands and knees to pour it over the bodies to speed up decomposition and mask the smell. When his wife or visitors commented on the peculiar, sweet, sickening odor rising from the floor, he brushed it off with total confidence, telling them it was just moisture and drainage issues from the crawl space backup. Let's do the other eye now, because symmetry in makeup is absolutely important, and so is understanding the sheer scale of this tragedy. When the crawl space literally ran out of physical room, when there was no more dirt left to dig, Gacy expanded his graveyard. He took 4 of his final victims, drove them out under the cover of night to the nearby I-55 bridge, and threw their bodies directly into the rushing waters of the Des Plaines River, letting the current carry his secrets away. And 3 more victims he buried right in his own backyard, digging deep graves under the soil. He later poured concrete over those graves, building a beautiful backyard patio where he would host his summer barbecues, serving food to his neighbors while standing directly above his victims. One of those victims was only 14 years old. A young boy named Samuel Stapleton, who had his whole life ahead of him. Another was 16-year-old Michael Bonin, a kid with passions and a family who loved him. When these boys vanished into thin air, their parents didn't just sit back. They searched frantically. They walked the streets of Chicago for weeks. They put up hundreds of missing person posters on telephone poles. They called the police department every single day begging for an investigation. And what did the authorities say? They dismissed them. They probably just ran away. Teenagers do this all the time, you know. They'll show up when they need laundry done. That is the specific detail that makes me angrier than the murders themselves. It's not just the existence of a singular, depraved serial killer, it's the systemic apathy that ignored the victims because they were perceived as poor, or gay, or troubled. The system created a vacuum of protection, and Gacy exploited it beautifully. We're going to deepen that eyeliner wing now, extending it outward, because we're still not done unmasking the psychological complexity of this individual. Alright, let's talk about the massive elephant in the room. The clown makeup that has defined his legacy in pop culture history. People who study this case always ask the exact same question: why did he dress as a clown? What was the deeper psychological trigger? The simple, superficial answer is that it was a convenient way to hide, a gimmick to get closer to communities. But the real psychoanalytical answer is infinitely more twisted. Gacy painted his face as Pogo the Clown to perform at neighborhood block parties, community parades, and charity events. He was photographed standing proudly next to political royalty, including first ladies. Years later, while sitting on death row, he would paint eerie self-portraits of himself in full Pogo attire, creations that would later shock the public by selling at underground auctions for thousands of dollars to macabre collectors. But let's look at the actual psychology of a clown. A clown is supposed to be an agent of pure fun. Safe. Approachable. They represent the ultimate cultural mask of joy. For John Wayne Gacy, putting on that face paint wasn't just a hobby, it was a psychological hall pass. It gave him absolute permission to be seen without being known. It gave him permission to be physically close to children and young people without raising a single red flag from parents. It allowed him to be the absolute center of attention, soaking up the applause of a crowd, without anyone ever catching a glimpse of the broken, abusive, hateful person dwelling underneath the skin. He once looked a close friend dead in the eye during a casual conversation and said, "You know, a clown can get away with murder." He said that with a chuckle. He said it as a light-hearted joke, years before the police ever knocked on his door. He was hiding his truth in plain sight, mocking the world. Now I'm going to do the red mouth, using a vibrant crimson lip liner to trace a massive, exaggerated smile across my face. Because Gacy's real, biological smile never reached his eyes, it was a calculated facial movement designed to simulate humanity. Let's talk about victim number 28. A young, vibrant 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest. He was a high school student, a well-liked kid who worked a part-time job at a local pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, to earn some extra spending money. On the evening of December 11, 1978, Robert went missing. Before he walked out the door of the pharmacy into the freezing winter air, he turned to his mother, who was waiting for him, and told her he was just going to step outside for a few minutes to meet a contractor who was at the store, a man offering him a high-paying winter construction job. His mother's name was Carol Piest. When her son didn't return to the car after 20 minutes, she didn't just sit there and wait. She didn't go home and assume he had run away with friends. Carol Piest did what no other mother had been empowered to do in this case. She screamed. She demanded immediate action from the store management. She called the police department within hours. She called the local newspapers. She called every friend, every relative, every contact she had. She made herself an absolute public nuisance. And finally, because of her relentless volume, someone in authority actually stopped and listened. Look at these blue triangles I'm drawing around my eyes now. This was Gacy's trademark design feature for Pogo. He would sit in front of his vanity, carefully painting these sharp geometric lines onto his skin, and then he'd pack up his balloon pumps and go perform for sick children in pediatric wards. I want you to sit with that specific contrast for a second. Let it sink in. A man with a meticulously painted smile, holding a colorful balloon animal, bringing a moment of joy to a child, and under his fingernails. Dirt from his crawl space. Traces of lime. The microscopic remnants of human blood. We're going to let that layer set for a moment. Because the next part of this narrative is about the sudden, catastrophic fall of an idol. Alright, let's take a makeup wipe and start to smudge this clown face, dragging the colors across the cheek. Because the mask is about to crack under the weight of an actual, dedicated police investigation. On that fateful evening of December 11, 1978, when Carol Piest officially reported her son Robbie missing, the initial response from the Des Plaines Police Department was typically slow. They viewed it as a standard missing teenager report. But one specific detective, a man named Joseph Kozenzak, developed a deep gut hunch that something was fundamentally wrong with the scenario. He interviewed the employees at the pharmacy and confirmed that Robbie had been seen talking to a contractor who had been doing remodeling work on the building earlier that day, a contractor named John Wayne Gacy. Detective Kozenzak went back to the station and pulled Gacy's official criminal record, expecting to find a clean slate. Instead, the dark past of Waterloo, Iowa, flashed on the computer screen: sodomy. A 10-year prison sentence. An inexplicable parole after just 18 months. Kozenzak immediately organized a team and went directly to Gacy's house on Summerdale Avenue to conduct a preliminary interview. When they knocked on the door, Gacy opened it with his characteristic charm fully on display. "Detective, please, come in out of the cold. Can I get you some hot coffee? Look, I'm a Democrat precinct captain in this area, I know the mayor personally. Let's not make a big public thing out of a simple misunderstanding." But as Detective Kozenzak stepped across the threshold into the living room, he didn't just hear Gacy's smooth words. He noticed the smell. A heavy, sweet, sickeningly rotting odor that hung thick in the warm air of the house, a smell that Kozenzak, a seasoned investigator, instantly recognized as the scent of dead tissue left out in the summer sun. When pressed about the bizarre odor, Gacy didn't flinch. He smiled and claimed it was just clogged drainage backup and sewage issues from the crawl space hatch. The detectives left, but they didn't drop the case. They put Gacy under 24-hour surveillance, watching his every move as he grew increasingly paranoid, driving erratically around the city. Finally, packing enough circumstantial evidence together, they managed to convince a judge to sign a comprehensive search warrant for the property. They returned to the house with shovels, flashlights, and forensic tools. They began to dig. On the freezing morning of December 22, 1978, investigators crawled into the cramped, dark underbelly of the house. Shoveling through the lime-soaked clay, they found the first body. It was a young man, his remains severely decomposed, with a thick fabric tourniquet still wound tightly around his neck bones. Then, as they cleared more dirt, they found another. And then another. A literal subterranean cemetery was unfolding beneath their feet. Gacy, meanwhile, was sitting silently in the back of an unmarked police car parked outside on the street. He sat there for hours, watching through the frosted window as forensic teams pulled body bag after body bag from the foundations of his beautiful home. He looked over at the deputy guarding him, sighed, and uttered an incredibly telling phrase, "You know, looking back, they should have never let me out of that prison in Iowa." That is not an expression of genuine human remorse. That is not a man crying for the lives he stole. That is a clinical narcissist who is actively blaming the criminal justice system for failing to stop him, deflecting his own personal guilt onto the institutions of society. By the time the exhaustive excavation process was finally completed weeks later, forensic teams had pulled an incredible 29 bodies from the dirt of the Summerdale property. Combined with the 4 victims recovered from the icy waters of the Des Plaines River, the official death toll stood at 33 identified individuals. But even today, decades after the digging stopped, several of those young boys remain completely unnamed, their identities erased by time and decomposition. They exist in police archives only as numbers, John Doe number 5. Or by tragic descriptions, like the boy they simply call the boy in the blue sweater. Here's the specific forensic detail that absolutely kills me every time I revisit this case file. After Gacy was processed and arrested, detectives conducted a meticulous sweep of the interior of his home, looking for trophies. In a drawer, they found a collection of personal photographs. It wasn't a standard family album. It featured photos of Gacy dressed in full Pogo the Clown makeup, posing dramatically over freshly dug trenches in his yard, smiling directly at the camera. He had documented his own horrific evil. He had turned his mass murder campaign into a sick, twisted personal scrapbook, relishing his crimes even while maintaining his public image as a savior of the community. Let's take a cotton swab and fix this lip line right now. One side of my mouth is perfectly clean, sharp, and structured, the other side is completely smeared, ruined, and dark. That image represents the duality of John Wayne Gacy. Half respected, civic-minded citizen, half unmitigated, predatory monster. Trial time. And in makeup terms, this is where we bring in the heavy contour. The sharp, dark definition. The harsh, unforgiving angles that cut across the cheekbones to create a completely new, structured face. Gacy's highly anticipated criminal trial began in Chicago on February 6, 1980, drawing international media attention. His high-priced defense team knew they couldn't deny the physical reality of the 29 bodies pulled from his property, so they pivoted to a classic strategy: legal insanity. Gacy took the stand and claimed he suffered from severe multiple personality disorder. He claimed he had no conscious memory of the violence, stating that a separate, autonomous personality named Jack was the one who committed the murders. Jack, he claimed, was a vicious entity that he couldn't control. But here's the problem with his elaborate courtroom performance: the prosecution team was incredibly prepared. They stood up before the jury and played hours of secretly recorded audio tapes of Gacy giving highly detailed, chronological confessions to police investigators immediately following his arrest. On those tapes, his voice wasn't confused or fractured. He remembered absolutely everything with terrifying clarity. He recalled the specific names of the boys. He remembered their faces. He described the exact physical sensation of the rope slipping through his hands as he tightened the knots. There was no mythical split personality named Jack. There was only John Wayne Gacy, a calculated killer who enjoyed every single second of his crimes. One of the most emotionally devastating moments of the trial occurred when a grieving mother took the witness stand to look her son's killer in the eye. Her name was Mrs. Antonucci. Her beloved young son, John Antonucci, had been identified as victim number 17 in the crawl space sequence. She stood in that quiet courtroom, gripped the wood of the witness stand, looked directly across the room at Gacy, and said through tears, "You stole my son's life. And you stole his beautiful smile from this world forever." And what was Gacy's reaction to this mother's profound grief? He didn't look down in shame. He didn't weep. He actually laughed. He leaned back in his chair and let out a cynical chuckle right in front of the jury, completely unable to maintain his mask of humanity any longer. The jury took one look at his arrogance and made their decision. They deliberated for less than 2 hours, barely enough time to have a meal, before returning with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to death by lethal injection. Death row and the final show. But John Wayne Gacy wasn't done performing for the public eye. Oh no, he treated his stay on death row at the Menard Correctional Center as an extended residency. He spent the next 14 years of his life capitalizing on his infamy, sitting in his cell painting endless variations of his clown portraits, signing them proudly, and selling them through intermediaries to murderabilia dealers for massive amounts of money. He gave high-profile television interviews to journalists, completely reversing his confessions. He claimed he was a completely innocent victim of a massive police conspiracy, shouting that the whole case was just a matter of bad local politics. Let's set all that harsh contour with a heavy dusting of translucent powder. Because the terrifying lesson of this trial is that sometimes true evil doesn't look like a cartoon monster. It doesn't hide in the bushes. It looks like a friendly man in a business suit, painting happy little clouds on a canvas while planning his next strike. I want to pause the makeup application right here. Because for the last 47 minutes of this broadcast, we've been talking almost exclusively about a serial killer. We've dissected his childhood, analyzed his psychology, tracked his movements, and focused on his crimes. And true crime channels, let's be honest, we do that all the time. We focus heavily on the monster because it's the name that drives the algorithm, it's the name in the title of the video, it's the terrifying face that populates the thumbnail to get clicks. But let me take a clean makeup wipe and vigorously wipe off half of this elaborate clown paint. Not all of it, just half. Because we need to look past the mythology of the killer clown and see the real human faces that were erased by his cruelty. Here are their names. I don't want you to just read them as a block of text, I want you to say them out loud with me, even if it's just a quiet whisper inside your own head. Timothy McCoy, 16. A young boy traveling through Chicago who just wanted to see the city sights. John Butkovich, 18. A hard-working young man who went to Gacy's house simply to collect the wages he was legally owed for his labor. Darrell Sampson, 19. A son who had big plans for his future, whose family never stopped looking for him. Randall Reffitt, 15. A kid who loved hanging out with his friends, taken off the streets on a normal afternoon. Samuel Stapleton, 14. Just 14 years old. A child who should have been worrying about high school homework, not fighting for his life in a basement. Michael Marino, 14. A boy with a bright future, whose disappearance broke his family's heart. Kenneth Parker, 16. A teenager with an infectious energy, missed by everyone who knew him. William Kindred, 19. A young man full of potential, looking for a steady career. These young men were absolutely not the runaways or the throwaway kids that the 1970s media tried to claim they were to excuse the lack of police action. They were loved sons. They were protective brothers. They were loyal friends. Some of them liked rock music, some excelled at high school sports. One of them dreamed of moving to California to become a high-end hairdresser, another wanted nothing more than to wear a real uniform and become a police officer to protect people. And every single one of them deserved the basic right to grow old, to have gray hair, to love, and to live. The execution of the monster. I'm going to put on some plain, untinted lip balm now, wiping away the remaining traces of color. Because after you spend time talking about 33 innocent boys buried like garbage under a suburban house, you don't need glamorous red lipstick. You don't need an elegant look. You need silence. And you need to actively remember the human cost of violence. The state-sanctioned execution of John Wayne Gacy finally took place at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. As he was strapped to the gurney and asked if he had any final words of repentance or peace for the victims' families, he sneered at the witnesses and uttered his final words to the world, "Kiss my ass." He died with that metaphorical, painted smile of defiance still locked inside his cold heart. But his victims? They died in terror, in the dark, without a single chance to say goodbye to the mothers who loved them. The lesson of blush and blood. So here's the fundamental question I ask at the conclusion of every single episode of Blush and Blood: what do we actually do with this information? Why do we look into the abyss? We put on makeup every morning to feel beautiful, to feel confident, to feel a sense of control over how the world perceives us. But the historical truth is that real monsters don't wear cartoon horns. They don't look like villains in a movie. They wear tailored business suits. They wear volunteer vests. They wear bright clown paint. The true horror of Gacy is not that he was a monster, but that he was a man who played a monster so well that the world applauded him for it. The ultimate lesson to extract from the tragedy of John Wayne Gacy is not a superficial warning to fear clowns. The real lesson is infinitely more practical: trust your gut instinct. If a person seems too nice, too flawless, too eager to please without a reason, pay attention. If a basement door feels too welcoming yet makes your skin crawl, don't go down. If a house smells too sweet, don't stay. Listen to that ancient, evolutionary survival feeling that whispers to you when danger is near. And for the love of everything holy in this world, if a child or a teenager goes missing in your community, don't let society tell you to sit down and be quiet. Don't stop screaming. Carol Piest managed to get justice for her son Robert because she fundamentally did not care if she was being annoying to the detectives. She didn't care if the police department rolled their eyes at her persistence. She screamed, she pushed, and she demanded action until someone finally picked up a shovel and dug into the dirt. So, today's finished makeup look is a completely clean face. And an incredibly heavy heart. If you want to truly honor the memory of the 33 victims we talked about today, here's what I ask you to do: say their names. Don't just click the like button on this video, leave a generic comment, and casually scroll away to the next piece of content. Take a second to say them out loud. Tell one person in your real life about one specific victim you learned about today. Because as long as we actively remember Timothy, and Samuel, and Robbie, they're not just anonymous numbers tracking on a police spreadsheet in a crawl space. They are real people. They are the true reason we watch these cases. They are the reason we remember. And this red lipstick that I'm putting away, it was never meant to represent a killer clown. It's a symbol for every fierce mother who ever refused to shut up in the face of injustice. Blush and Blood will be back next week with a historical narrative that's even darker, peeling back another layer of the human condition. But for now, take off your makeup. Wash your face. Cleanse your skin. And go hug someone you love tightly. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and most importantly, never forget to scream when it matters. Good night.